being able as men to set the ego aside, right, and understanding that, yeah, you don't own yes, you brought your children into this world, but you don't own them, right? And if they challenge your way of thinking, it's not necessarily a negative thing. If anything, it is a positive thing, because it shows that, hey, they have their own brain. They can think for themselves, and they're willing to. If they're willing to challenge you, their parent, well, then they're ready to challenge the world as well.
And we're live. Hit him with that intro.
All right, we are back at the Electives Podcast with our good buddy and friend, Nick Thompson. Nick works for the city of Aurora, but he also does so much more. He's involved with the community, and we're thankful to have him on. Thank you for being here with us.
Definitely. Thanks, man.
Yeah, man.
So who's Nick, man? Tell us a little bit about yourself, what you do. I mean, you come here looking all fresh. I know you do something important.
No, man, we all do something important.
There you go.
That's probably going to be most of the conversation. But
True.
First and foremost, I appreciate y'all for having me on. I appreciate what y'all are doing. I love to see cats from the community putting the community on in this way, and I think we need so much in terms of media. So as someone who, my undergraduate was in media studies, talking about myself, like I have a great appreciation because public information in any form is critical. So the discussions and discourses y'all be having, I think, are necessary for the youth, folks older, and just anybody in general. So first and foremost, appreciate y'all for that.
Man, I appreciate that. Appreciate that.
That being said, as was mentioned, I work for the city of Aurora.
Mm-hmm.
I work in the mayor's office of community affairs. I do a variety of different tasks day to day, and some of it falls under the purview of media. Some of it is communications. At times it's liaising. Sometimes it's like what I would describe as community work, and bringing together parties that otherwise maybe wouldn't have had that connection, and trying to connect people and link folks together. Mm-hmm. With that, you mentioned the work I do in the community. That's kind of like my life's purpose and what drives me. And that is just really like on a basic level, I believe in, democratizing society more and socializing production and working towards the most liberated type of communities we can have. And that looks very different sometimes. Sometimes it's working with our undocumented community. Sometimes it's working on food sovereignty and food insecurity, working with our forage program. Sometimes it's our book club. I think it takes many shapes, and it's required. So for me, the work that I do professionally, I try to intertwine with my personal life, but there's contradictions, and you can't always do that. And then vice versa. I think I don't separate the two. At my base, I'm, what is called, people call themselves organizers. I'm an organizer and a cultural worker. Mm-hmm. And my medium is filmmaking and poetry, and I try to link all of that together to create change, just be the best person I could be, and things of that nature.
Solid, man, solid. And what age were you when you decided that you wanted to be all of these things? Did it kind of happen piece by piece?
That's good. It's an ongoing process. I'm gonna talk about processes a lot today, probably. And I think what sparked it though was probably 1920. And I've shared this in some spaces, but I don't mind. I got some trouble with the criminal legal system, which now I call it the criminal punishment system, but at the time I was like, yeah, man. And what actually was great was that the lawyer I got involved with was like, man, you're not like my normal clients, which today now I feel differently about him saying that. But at the time what he was saying was, you shouldn't be here. And he offered me, he was like, if you read this book, we gonna work out the price. Cause I had a savings with nothing in it. I was like just out of high school, and I was like 20, 19, I was like 20, maybe turning 21. And the cat was like, if you read the autobiography of Malcolm X, we'll work something out. So I read it, and that led me to look at his speeches. Cause I think his book doesn't even capture how revolutionary he was and his political positions. So I read the book, I picked up his speeches, I looked at his writings. Even when he was incarcerated, he was brilliant, right? And that really galvanized me to be like it's so funny now. Like I started going to community college, and I started wearing suits every day because this brother, right?
Because of my
I had an uncle who was practicing Islam, so I started going to the mosque, right? Like I completely changed my life, and from there I've grown significantly and have carried on some of that. Some of them have changed. I think I've matured in different ways and have still one of the greatest appreciations for Malcolm X. Shout out to you for having, the namesake too, brother. And I would say, probably 20 when I decided to be like, yo, I want to be a force for my people in my community. I want to live for my people, and I want to find different ways and avenues to serve the masses. And it came from, Malcolm X, really.
That's awesome, man.
Awesome. That's what's up, man. And what made you decide to work here for the city? Are you from here, or are you from Where you from?
I am from Aurora, and that's a great question. So, and I was talking to somebody the other day, and they was like, "How long have you been organizing at this point?" And I'm 29 now. I'm like, actually, a decade. It feels weird to say a decade, but I've been doing this work for a decade. And a lot of the work started in Chicago. A lot of my early organizational like partnerships and like I think experience started in Chicago. And with that, what ended up happening is I noticed a lot of the similarities in political social struggles happen here in smaller cities. And out there, the tensions are more, I think, evident, and because they seem more prevalent, there is a greater force there, just like on a grassroots level. But in some of these smaller cities, you have the same problems. They're just hidden in a different way and to a different degree. And what made me come here, because I was born here, but two, like, you're a resource. Y'all chose to stay here. That's important. Y'all could have went to Cali, started this podcast, and it might have been, it might have popped off sooner, right? That mindset always, and again, we're gonna talk about this a lot today. It's very individualistic. A lot of my politics rejects individualism. I believe in sacrificing the individual will for the collective good. I recognize myself as a resource to the Aurora community. I could easily go to Chicago, probably get paid more. I could easily go there, and organizing would look vastly different. In some regards, more difficult, but in some regards, easier because there's more of a political base there already who are already activated. So it could be, in most basic terms, easier for me to go there. I'd rather stay where I'm born because resources leave cities like this all the time because there's no opportunity. That's an individualistic mindset. And also, I think it's a self-fulfilling prophecy, because if you're always leaving, who's creating the opportunities? Who's creating the organizations? Who's creating the moments and the different culture and the art? You're all leaving, so of course it's not there. So I'd like to be a part of that.
Yeah, and to tie into that, so we talk about in some of the other podcasts, like you start something, but it seems to be that your community doesn't seem to embrace you right away. You know what I'm saying? So why do you think that is? And what do you think we could do better as a community to keep everybody here? Because people leave because they get embraced in Cali, for example, instead of here. And because people here are probably like, that's cool, but, you know, you ain't pop off yet, so I can't follow you yet. What do you think about that?
That's a good question, and it's a legitimate one. I think there's different ways to approach it and go about it. I believe sincerity will take you far. And if you are being genuine and sincere and you are working on your craft constantly, you will build that support. You will build that unity, I would call it, especially in the sense of organizing. I'm also a documentarian, and, you know, I had just recently did a private screening of my director's cut of a film I did for the city of Elgin. And I was surprised by the outpouring of folks that came out. But when I noticed, though, a lot of folks who came out from different realms and the sectors that I do. Some folks were there because they knew me from poetry. Some folks were there because they knew me from the city. Some folks were there because they was like, this brother real serious about this revolutionary work. And my documentary like covered that. So I realized like that sincerity, and I've always, you know, done that. I don't do anything with an ulterior motive of like tit for tat. Again, it's like with the genuine. So I feel like if you're being genuine, you are perfecting your craft because you want quality, right? It will naturally flow. Now, will it be expedited somewhere else? It may be, but that is not the question of, you know, on building something sustaining. My ideal is to work towards something that is not only sustainable, but like grassroots and organic. And sometimes you got to just be patient and work towards that and have that I think that grit sometimes, and be like, yeah, there's going to be people who don't want to support you, maybe just on the nature of incidental features that you have or the nature of like something in themselves, but there will be those few supporters that do, and pay attention to those and not the others, and you just got to sometimes struggle for that, you know what I mean?
No, man, that's right on the money. I mean, because even with us starting this podcast, I mean, to your point, we wanted to build it organically. You know, our following, the people that watch us, they watch us religiously or listen to us religiously on a week-to-week basis are, you know, people that we know, people that can sense that we're being genuine, that we're just being ourselves. We're not trying to be anything other than what we are. You know, we're not trying to be Hollywood. We're not trying to be famous. That's not why we started it. You know, so no, we resonate with that 100%, man. And you know, hopefully, what we want to continue to do too, man, is continue networking with other people within the community, and just being another branch, you know, on the tree, and just growing.
Yeah, definitely. How did you? I mean, I probably caught a glimpse of it after you read that book with you know, Malcolm X's book. But how did you get involved in politics, and was it because there's probably so many different avenues you could have took. So what made you get involved with politics, and when did that start?
So that was probably around the time after I read Malcolm, because immediately after I was reading, because I also developed a love for reading. So I started reading everything, and everything from things that I agree with, things that I didn't, because that's what Malcolm did. I wanted to completely kind of understand my positions and flesh them out. I had a lot of questions. So with questions, I needed answers. I just kept reading. But with that, that's what I would consider theory. I was theorizing about a lot of things. I was in my room by myself, and I realized that this was not going to transform material conditions. That had to happen through struggle, through mass movement, through organization. I believe the organization is so important and critical, and has been arguably the only kind of force that has transformed society historically. It's mass movements and organizations. So I got involved in politics then, because I think you have to find your avenue, find what you can give at your capacity. And sometimes at first it was like political campaigns. I was working on campaigns, and, you know, from policy advising, communications, to door knocking. And then I realized, you know, at a certain point, that I don't have a whole lot of faith in organized politics at the state, certainly not the national level. Mm-hmm. And I realized there was power that was kind of just seated oftentimes at the local level, that folks do not engage in the same way. You sending money to your favorite politician, and you shouldn't have favorite politicians, but you sending money to your favorite politician,
right.
running for Congress, does not go as far as you supporting our mutual aid campaign that gets people fed and housed in your neighborhood. Yep. And I started realizing my politics change. You grow, you mature, and this is an ongoing process. I might, from 3 weeks from now, change a position if I'm presented new information. But I'm really focused on now the local and the building organizational structure here, and with, you know, within the surrounding area, right? And my involvement began there, just like through trial and error, and figuring out more of how can we take theory into practice, and how did we make practice effective? Because you can also be practicing and doing and engaging in struggle, as many organizations do, but doing it in an ineffective way. I've met organizations that have been around for 20 years, and this is no slight, but I try to be as accurate as possible because I want to get free. So, you know, in organizing spaces, we have to be honest with each other. I tell folks, what have we produced in these 20 years? You've gotten a lot of money. You know, I could look at your books. What have we produced materially? Is there an ordinance? Is there a policy? Do we have structures in our community that are independent from the government and independent from the private sector that support the masses? And if the answer is no, well, we did something wrong. And that's okay. Mm-hmm. This is not a condemnation. Mm-hmm. But then how do we effectively build organization that can build infrastructure, that can build longevity, and actually transform people's lives? So, longer roundabout way, I got involved just through trial and error, and, you know, still.
I mean, that's a lot to take in too,
it
man.
Is,
but you've been doing a lot. So who's been? Because we talk about this too all the time. Who's been your coach or your mentor aside from Malcolm and reading the books? Because you came in 10 years ago, so you'd been 19. You know, young man. You know, still haven't grown up yet. Who's been kind of guiding you along the way? Maybe it's multiple people, or maybe it's one person, but.
So I think at times, you know, mentorship can come in many fashions, and I actually just formalized the mentorship. Like, I actually requested this person to be my mentor. Prior to that, I hadn't had one. It kind of had been relationships of people who had seen my work and trusted in me and gave me opportunities. So, you know, and I'll name drop people. It's been like professors at Columbia University. Her name is PD, and if folks who go to Columbia definitely know her. Colombian, Afro-Cuban, and just like her analysis on race, class, and media really gave me a strong foundation when I was just developing with Malcolm. And it really was transformative. I still keep up with her to this day, Janet Pena Davis. And me getting into the city, a lot of folks might know the name in Aurora, but Alexander Perez is another brother who gave me a great opportunity to intern for him, which in turn, you know, my predecessor, I assumed his position when he departed the city. So with that, and like, him giving me that opportunity also led me to finishing college, because I secured real quickly a grant, but I had to get a internship. Folks was not giving me internship. He gave me an internship, which gave me the grant, which helped me finish college, because I couldn't finish. I was out of money. I was out of hope, really.
Right.
So that he's been a mentor. And then, you know, I think recently Ajamu Baraka, which, you know, most notably folks just who maybe not be involved in Black liberation or struggle, he ran for the Green Party's vice president in 2016. And I read his work in that year, because a lot of folks were supporting, I remember, Bernie Sanders, and I had no issue with the brother, but he didn't fully comprehensively, I feel, represent what I wanted. There's positions that I had really strongly that he didn't bring up, or he would brought up and I thought were a little sloppy. And I was like, I don't know where I land. And still developing politically, I read an article by Jamal Baraka about Bernie Sanders and Obama. And I was reading his work and I was like, this is where I'm at. This brother's powerful.
Yeah.
I was like, where has this person been my whole life? Like, why is he not discussed? And then in 2017, he started an organization that I do most of my work through called the Black Alliance for Peace, which is an anti-war, anti-imperialist, pro-peace organization rooted in the Black radical tradition. And I immediately joined. I signed up for the newsletter. I didn't do too much work with the organization 2017, 2018, 2019. I started actually doing videos for them and cutting and actually getting involved with the struggle. 2020, I was, on boots on the ground doing work for them. And then 2021, I was made the regional coordinator for the Midwest. And since then, just been like, that's the organization I do the most work through. But there's many others that are hyper local that I work through. But Jamal Baraka, Professor Davis, Alexander Perez, and then the folks that I read, I try to, because I'm a mentor and I mentor college kids, grammar school kids, and then just folks in the community. Like I've met, I do a lot of work with parents who are like, can you like mentor my son? So like, it just kind of came about, but like I didn't know how to be a mentor. So I had to I started reading. I bought a bunch of books trying to learn about it. I watched a bunch of YouTube videos trying to learn about it because I was like, I can give you my story, but the other help in terms of self-development, the voice of reason at times, the safe space, the confidant, and to be able to, it makes me want to be better. And we talked about this. We might get to this, like even like fatherhood. It makes me want to be a better person. 'Cause I'm like, these people do look up to me as a resource. So if I'm not, bettering myself constantly, I'm doing a disservice to them. So you definitely, I think everybody should have a mentor. And Jamal Baraka, I asked him like, yo, I need to meet with you once a month. Is that cool? I know you're busy. Like he's in Colombia right now doing work. So like it's busy, but he's like, yeah, we definitely will meet once a month. So I was like, I want your guidance and mentorship. You've been organizing since like the 60s, like your brother's serious. So just being able to learn from elders and, former Panthers and stuff. I'm just so honored. There's so many names now. Yeah.
No, that's awesome, man. And that's a perfect segue. I'm glad that you brought that up because that is something that we briefly discussed. Off camera is that this idea that, I don't have children, David has children, you don't have, well, you have a stepson, right? And how that has changed your complete outlook on life. Would you say that it changes the way that you've looked at the near future and the future as a whole?
Absolutely. So when I look at the near future, my thoughts are now in a different way, like from a protector, provider, but also you can protect and provide, but if you are not, I think, a pillar of excellence, you're doing a disservice. Your character, your behavior, and how you engage with others is going to be seen. It's going to be recognized. It's going to be picked up. So, I have to be very conscious of how I engage and I act. And, nobody's perfect. So you slip up. But like what keeps me saying, well, I need to do better on this regard, this aspect, is because somebody's watching me and it's intently, it's in closely. So for me, the near future has definitely changed in terms of even my professional career. I'm like, you know what, at this age, at this time, I want to be doing X, Y, Z, because that's going to help me be a better father because I can be more present. I can be home, hybrid, like things that before were, inconsequential to me because I'm like, brother, I'll put in those hours. I don't need to be home working. But now I'm like, I need to be a little bit more present, And the liberation work is always going to get done. But now it's an opportunity to incorporate that child, and they may not pick up the work, but like I want them to be around. I want them to see the food distributions. I want them to see the book club. I want them to see the genuine community that we build and how we engage with people and how we talk to the unhoused, how we talk to folks that that are oftentimes neglected in our society. I want that to be seen. So incorporating that child into that work is also in the near future and longevity too.
Nice, man. Now, do you think that that's because something that we also discussed too is like this idea of rebuilding the family unit, right? And so everything that you just mentioned is you holding yourself to a certain level of accountability and responsibility as one of the pillars of your family and future family that you're going to continue to build and continue to grow, right? Because without the family unit, there's no community. Right, there's no neighborhood, there's no any of that. And so the work that you're talking about doing right now and being conscious of your own actions and what little man is watching you do on a day-to-day basis will, at least in my opinion, hold it's a domino effect. right? Because the generations that come after us ultimately are the ones that really, man, we're trying to protect, that we're trying to raise, that we're trying to educate and learn to create a better society. Because to your point, we can't do it all by ourselves. We can't do it all alone. You know, we need community.
So I definitely agree with everything you just said. We need community. You know, nothing worth doing is done in a silo. So what it looks like to me in rebuilding the family unit is there's an African proverb that I shared with you before, and that is, if you want to go fast, go alone. If you want to go far, go together. So, you know, I think rebuilding our communities, I think there's policy questions that have to be tackled. The ways in which the economy is arranged in such a way, can we support working class people and uplift them so they have the financial means to take care of the material needs? Then do we have the appreciation and the cultural transformation of, do we value the mental health? Because if a parent is empty, right, how can they pour into something?
Right.
So it really starts with the parents as well. And that comes from public policy, it comes from culture, but a lot of that takes longer to change. But what we can do immediately is, I think, open up our doors. I think we have a media, we have a political reality that have created much tension and polarization that has created more alienation. We are more separated than ever, though we are more connected than ever, right? It's
It's the
contradiction.
weirdest thing.
Right.
Man.
So
weird.
how do we rebuild those connections, right? Like, I remember it's one of my mentors, PD. She was like, you know, in my community when I was growing up, like, children felt safe with the lady across the street, with the man down the street, with the workshop, like, and you could let them go outside, and the community genuinely raised these children together. Now, this is a longer conversation, we'll get into it. The way cities have zoning and have structured how communities are built deeply impacts that. It deeply impacts access to healthy, sustainable food. Is there a market in your community? Access to health care and things like that. Some of this was done deliberately. That being said, with what we have currently, I think there should be honest efforts made to go to communities where you can support and build on the legacy currently. Like, me and my partner just bought a house, right?
Nice.
And we were intentional about, thank you, I
Congrats on that,
appreciate
man.
that. Yeah, appreciate
It's
the first
huge.
home, both of us, right?
Nice.
So it was so important for us to go to a community that we could build upon and raise a family in, but also organize. And we saw that we were intentional with that, and we did that, and trying to get know our neighbors slowly. And this is our first year there, so slowly just getting comfortable and acclimated. But building the family unit is one, I think, redefining what it is, because I think there are very different definitions of it. So I think expanding the definition and not pigeonholing it and saying, you know, the family unit, well, it actually has to be X, Y, Z. I think that has to be thrown out the window first. Do we have people in our lives that care about us, who we care about, who we can rely upon, who can protect, preserve, and keep us safe, and we can rely upon each other in a mutual way? And that, I think this starts to shape how we can reimagine the family unit, and then reimagine on a larger level our community, because I think the family unit is a microcosm of our communities, what we do interpersonally, right? You know, I subscribe to a lot of abolitionist like principles, and one of them deeply looks at like interpersonal conflict resolution. Can we do that together, and then can we take that to the community for other problems, right? And I think that's when you start really making these ties, making these changes in your personal life that can then translate to the broader community, and like having a radical empathy. It's not always easy. And I'm trying to practice this every day. Sometimes it's really difficult, but to have a radical empathy, even for those who do not wish you well, and figuring out ways we can resolve things for the best interest of you, me, and the collective. Again, sacrificing the individual will for the collective good, letting go of ego, but looking at what outcomes do we want, right? When I get into and I mean argument in the sense of we have a disagreement. When I get in an argument with anybody, disagreement, I ask, what outcome do you want out of this? What outcome do I want out of this? And then oftentimes you want a very similar outcome. The discourse is not going to provide that. So we have to change how we even interact now and say, okay, can we do things and act in such a way that would be in accordance to the outcome we want to yield? And that changes everything. So really thinking about outcomes.
Yeah, and a tie in with that. So speaking about community, it seems like the new version of community, you know, is our phones, like you held up. So, which has impacted the way we probably grew up, going to the neighbor's house, you know. So now that you're a stepfather, have you thought about using that device, the online community, because it's YouTube, TikTok, Instagram, to use it in a like a better way, instead of letting the community that's out there dictate what your kid's gonna see. Because the reality of the situation is, like with my kids, they're gonna have it regardless, and you can't be the parents like you can't have a phone. Like we're just in that age. You got a phone, so how can I use it for, for the better of them? And like in my case, I try to use the algorithm to send only positive things every day. Because believe it or not, we only get so much times with our kids. They're at school for 8 hours. They go to sports for another 2 hours, and then that leaves us dinner time and sleep time. So where are our kids getting the most information from? It's usually the phone or whoever else. So what do you think about using the device in a positive way?
I think that's a pressing question, and I would never pretend to know all the answers. But the first thing that comes to mind is what I talked about a little bit earlier, is being consistent in the way you act, because some of that will just happen through observation, because we can only learn in several ways, right? One is observation, one is experience, and one is maybe reading and research. So I think hopefully manipulating the algorithm, and I think it's a multi-pronged approach, hopefully manipulating the algorithm in such a way that it produces content that is self-enriching, that is aligned with the home values, and that is not, going to be degrading those moral values that you're trying to build, right? Contrary to it. And then also trusting your child, and this depends on different ages too, right? Leo's not true. where he needs to be to do this because he's too young, but I would say developing very strong principles and values. So even with their friends alone, they can resort back to those values, right? And what I do with my mentees all the time, and when they ask questions, I was like, well, because sometimes they'll ask me literally, what do I do? I never want to tell you exactly what to do. What I'd rather do is provide you and equip you with the skills necessary to critically think, and maybe the moral compass to decide upon your own. I'll never tell you what to think. I'm hoping I can tell you how to think.
And that right there, I mean, that is so huge. That is so huge, because like you're saying, I mean, you're not always going to be around.
Right.
But if you teach your daughters how to think for themselves, whatever situation they find themselves in, they'll be able to get themselves out if they do find themselves in a sticky situation.
Right. And with that, we'll take a quick break.
Cool.
Yeah, we back from the break.
Cool. All right. So our next question, man, that we have for you is about, and you just briefly discussed it, but it's organization. What are the 3 things that you want to focus on when it comes to organization?
For sure. So when talking about organization, the 3 things that I always try to get across to people is the 3 C's. So it's alliteration. It's easy to remember, right? How are we going to coordinate? How are we going to communicate? And how do we collectivize power? When you have those 3 questions answered, it will inform how you move, how you make decisions, and the ways in which your organization grows. Because that's the idea. We want to grow an organization that can then be pillars and resources for the community to come to solve our day-to-day problems, to build power, to respond to government, to respond to the private sector, to respond in the interest of working class people. And if you don't have those organizations, those staples in a community, then the void of that will be filled by private interest that perhaps is not aligned with everyday working class people, businesses, developers, investors. And oftentimes I think there's just a common misconception that if you have businesses and investors that they have the best interest of the community. That's not always the case. They have an interest in profit. Do we prioritize profit over people? And that's a really critical question that we are dealing with on a national and a global level, right? So when we have those 3 C's, though, the organizations, I think, are equipped and tasked with, at the very least, the ability to start building an effective organization that can start transforming the day-to-day.
And to tie into that, why should we as a society adopt a more objective approach when discussing politics? Because obviously, as we've talked about, politics and religion get real sticky real quick. So
and I was gonna say too, me working in a barbershop, right? These are 2 things that we talk about all the time, because we're not in the barbershop setting. There's nothing you really have.
That's
to worry
like a
about.
safe place.
The
barbershop, right? You can say whatever.
Right, but I wish we would take more of the barbershop approach out into society, because in the barbershop setting, right, I don't get offended if you and I don't agree or disagree.
Yeah, because we're in a barbershop.
Exactly. What's the number 1 go-to conversation right now in sports? Is LeBron or Jordan?
Jordan, yeah.
Right? that conversation has been had a billion times in a
Right.
barbershop. And still to this day that I know of, I've never heard of a fight breaking out simply because one guy said
Yeah.
LeBron, the other guy said MJ. It's just that's how you feel. That's what
Right.
you're passionate about. You
Right.
get your point across, and that's it. But you could allude a little bit more to why we should remain objective.
First off, yeah, brother, bring the barbershop to the masses. Bring it to the public forum. I think discourse in public forum is important to a democracy. I would argue that the United States is not a democracy, and I'll get into why. But first, I'll answer the question.
Cool.
Because it's going to tie you in.
Cool.
So, in the attempt to be objective, I remember I was working on my documentary. I got interviewed, and they asked, interesting questions. And they're like, you have a very, obvious, like, political position. How are you going to remain objective in this or neutral? And I was like, this is the thing. There's no such thing as neutrality. People have political, social, and economic interest. You can be objective, but this idea of neutrality should be done away with. I think it's a false misconception, and it leads people to believe that, well, they're just operating from a place of pure reason, and that's not the case. So when I'm thinking about philosophically, and we kind of got into this, I am what is called a dialectical materialist. What that means, I'm going to give a definition, I'm going to give an example. What that means is I prioritize material conditions, contemporary and historical, right, like situations, and I put precedence on reality, concrete reality, in which we can measure and adjust, right, the ebbs and flows. Philosophically, most people are not always knowing idealists. Conservatism and liberalism are both idealist philosophies. The difference between a materialist and idealist philosophy is this. I'll give you an example. We'll take something such as the Second Amendment. Very contentious debate. How a dialectical materialist would approach the debate. They may come up at different, I think, conclusions on the policy, but this is how they would take it. The amendment was written a long time historically. Things have changed since then, right? Materially, things have changed. Societally, culturally, politically. Idealism holds up ideals and moralizations. They have moral abstractions, and they hold the ideal as important. So the idea of the Second Amendment as an ideal, we must uphold it in perpetuity. Well, the materialist says, well, now we have automatic weapons. This is not the same idea. It's not the same.
Yeah, things
So,
have changed.
Inconsequentially, idealist philosophies are very stagnant. I don't think they're equipped to deal with the ever-changing nature of the world.
Right.
A materialist would say, well, historically, that was a ideal that got us through some times, but materially today, it does not suffice. We have to come up with new solutions, and we can't just uphold an ideal and that takes precedence over reality, right?
No, I agree.
And the quote that I think captures it is this. It is not one's social consciousness that determines their social reality, but it is their social reality that determines their consciousness. And that's the materialist part, that reality is going to influence this. But some people say thoughts come first. Now, the dialectical part comes in. I don't think it's either or, it's and also. They shape each other. So that's the dialectical part of the materialist part. So I'm a dialectical materialist. I believe, yes, the world has, and the material conditions and the objective reality definitely influence our thoughts, but our thoughts influence the world, and it's an ever-changing, simultaneous relationship. Whereas philosophically, oftentimes the debates that we're having are just, there's false premises, right? So they get into culture wars then, and it gets really lost. But at a fundamental level, when you bring it back, I always tell people, we bring it back to the fundamental level of the disagreement, it'll, I think, illustrate and illuminate why we disagree. And the disagreement to me oftentimes is a philosophical one of misunderstanding material and idealist philosophies.
I agree. And I think also, too, as human beings, man, people can get overly emotional about something that they believe in, rather than allowing themselves to be objective and to hear someone outside. It's like, no, maybe this is what my grandmother believed, this is what my father believed, this is what, et cetera, and they're willing to die by what they believe rather than to say, like, you know what, maybe there is another way to look at this. Maybe I can step to the side a little bit and say, okay, I don't agree with it 100%, but I can get where you're coming from,
I love that. And then, again, and I'll say this, like, we should never let passions dominate reasons, but we should not discard emotions and, like, compassion and empathy. Those should inform public policy. But we should also be deeply aware of, again, the material conditions which inform each other. So that's why I think it is not either or, it's and also.
Yep.
And taking both and saying, yeah, I do have a morality and I do have a love for my neighbor, the forsaken, the forgotten, the people who are downtrodden and left out of society, the unhoused, those suffering from substance use. We do love them.
So fatherhood, we're gonna touch on that. We talked about remaining objective, right? And as a father, it seems like it's a skill that you're gonna just always constantly be working on, because Nick grew up one way, your kids are gonna grow up another way. So obviously you have your beliefs and everything, and you were like, this is how it's supposed to work, what? And so how do you plan to remain objective if they come to you and are like, Dad, that ain't right, man. I don't think you're right. How do you plan on taking that?
So again, I'm gonna ask it in a humorous way and then give you the real answer. Right. And that is, well, show me your citations, brother. If he comes with or they come with an evidence-based argument, like they read an old article I wrote or something, and there's like, man, at your last event you said this, I disagree with it, but they can show and prove. Like again, I said, like my politics as basis to win. I want to liberate. I want to work towards victory. And if they were to present me something that was better as an idea or how I was leading the family, you would have to take serious that child. I think one, it builds confidence in them. Two, the maturity though, right? If they're correct, if they're correct, you definitely have to move like that because one, it's going to be a learning moment for them. They're going to be like, well, when my dad's incorrect, he puts aside his ego, says he's incorrect, and moves accordingly.
Yeah, and that's huge, right? Because I'm sure for you, man.
Yeah,
and like one of the things I've told this guy is, I think and we don't know, but if for whatever reason him and his wife decide that they want to have a third kid, right, and he has a son, I think the blessing was that he had two daughters first, because it taught him to be more patient. If he would have had a son, I just feel like he would have been way too hard on him.
I agree with that.
And but I mean, being able as men to set the ego aside, right, and understanding that, you don't own yes, you brought your children into this world, but you don't own them, right? And if they challenge your way of thinking, it's not necessarily a negative thing. If anything, it is a positive thing because it shows that, hey, they have their own brain. They can think for themselves, and if they're willing to challenge you, their parent, well, then they're ready to challenge the world as well.
Ooh,
right?
that's powerful. They're ready to challenge the world.
Yeah.
That means that the father, you would have facilitated the relationship in which they felt comfortable coming to you like that. And I would love, like I said before, I would be proud. I would be elated. I'd be ecstatic if they came to me and presented something, was like, I feel differently about this. And we had a discussion. I'd be like, I'm doing the fatherhood thing right, probably, right? So with that, man, I think it comes with like, and I said this before, loving a child, loving your partner, loving anybody is a craft. Where do we and when do we learn how to love? There is not emphasis put on it in public schools, private schools. There's not emphasis really put on it in any other area of life, but it's one of the most important things we do with our life on this earth, the limited time, is love. But we don't put, I think, the importance or the attention to it. So then, for me, love is a craft. It's an art form in which, like podcasting, picking up a guitar, you got to constantly get better and better and better. So for me, being objective would mean loving that child unconditionally and remaining as, I think, humbled and moving with humility so that they're always watching, that how I engage with them is always a learning lesson. How I respond to them is always going to be taken into account because that's how they're learning how to love. They're like, well, then when I'm right about something and my response is negative or my response is to disregard them, dismiss them, belittle them, they're taking that in whether they know it consciously or not. So instead, like, we learn how to love almost first and foremost from our family unit, like back at home. And if you don't learn it there, you might just go into a traumatic relationship. You might pick up habits. You think you have an idea of what love is, and you don't. And we move through the world, hurting other people, developing habits and different things, and it's all stemming from trauma because we didn't learn how to love. So it's one of the most important things, and hopefully my goal is to always remain objective in that, knowing that it's a craft, that I'll get it wrong, but if I can admit that I'm wrong, that I can be patient with my child. That's when it comes from, and that's when I think you are being objective, like literally saying, you're right.
Nice, man.
I was not a father at that, or I wasn't a good father at that point. I could be better though.
Right.
Yeah, because I found myself doing that. Like, I've had to say sorry by the end of the night, you know, because, you know, you sit there and think as a dad, and you're like, and I'm like, man, I was wrong, So then you go
see, I feel
walk
like
up
that's
the
gonna be me.
stairs, and I'm like, I go up to my it's usually my oldest, because, you know, my little one's 4. So I'm like, hey, I'm sorry, I was wrong. And she's like, and then she lets me have it. And I'm like, and I'm okay with it, because, you know, I deserve it. You know, I was wrong.
Yeah.
But you know, it does take, it's like you said, it's an art. Like, you literally have to work on that all the time, because there's, you know, like I told him, by the end of the night, whatever happened at the day, it's got to be done by the time we go to sleep. Like, we can't.
There was a way you said it.
I forgot how, man.
No,
I forgot how
I
said it.
remember. And when he said this, I was like, you know, you could do something with that.
Yeah.
But he said it's got to be dead before bed.
There you go. That's what I said.
So they don't allow themselves in their household to be mad or upset with one another. They address the issue before they go to bed.
Right, and
which
it's always I love you before you go to bed, and everything's all
I think
cool.
it's powerful.
Because then we wake up, I don't want to bring that to the next day.
Nah.
Because then it turns into, you know, maybe you don't talk to each other the first 5, you know, in the morning. Then it turns in, dang, I haven't talked to you for a day.
Right.
Then it's 2 days, and then it's like, by then it's like, now, you know, now you got to backtrack all them days, and, you know, you lost all that time. We talk about time.
Yep.
You know, so.
And we all think that we have more time, right? We all think that, okay, you know, let's say you didn't have a conversation in the morning, you just let it fester.
Right.
Well, we don't know what life has in store for anybody. Accidents happen all the time, right? So you didn't tell somebody that you love them before they left to go to school or to go to work, whatever the case is. Right. And then something happens, and now you got to sit there with that. When in the back of your mind, you know, man, I was just being petty.
Right,
I was
petty.
just being prideful.
Yep.
I was just being egotistical. And what I love about this conversation, about this dialogue, is all of us, obviously, we're men, and you guys both have children involved in your lives. But just, I love hearing that as fathers, that you guys are being this conscious about it, and that you're taking the time to separate your ego. You know, because I mean, I want to see this happen more, right? And I want to see us as men continue to evolve into this space, but I just don't see this a lot. I don't see this a lot in parenting, you know? So kudos to you guys. Kudos to you, gentlemen.
Appreciate it, man. Appreciate it.
It's a lot of work. I'm sure it's a lot of work.
Oh, yeah, it's a lot of work, man, especially when you got more than one.
Yep. Yep.
You got more than one. You got to teach the older one, and then you got to teach the younger one.
Yeah.
It's crazy, man.
Yeah.
How old your stepson?
3, he'll be 4 in June 1st.
Oh, yeah, so you know what I'm going through. My daughter's 4, going to be 5.
Wow.
I think she's going to be 25.
So what would you say is the biggest thing that he's taught you?
That's a good question. The biggest thing that he taught me, and I dealt with a lot of this because I had a particular type of upbringing, and like I wasn't close with my father, right? Early on, I didn't get close with him until my 20s because him and my mom had split up, so I didn't see him. And then in my 20s, we had started having like grown man conversations about masculinity, manhood, politics. You know, he was always politicking. He had an interesting upbringing. He came from Holly Springs, Mississippi. He died when he was 83, so he was born and he lived through Jim Crow, right? He escaped racial violence, and like he told me stories. He even told my sisters, who were like all daddy's girls, who were closer with them. And I'm the youngest, right? So he starts to get sick though. He's diagnosed with cancer. He beats it. It metastasized, and then by 24, he's dead. I lose him in 2018, right? And there's so many questions that I had now being like in someone's life as a father figure that I'll never get to ask, right? And I know he had, and he shared it with me, I had made many mistakes as a father. He had told me that. And I wish I could learn from that. And what I learned from what gave me some solace in it, because it bothered me for a long time, I was like, I really realistically, sometimes I feel like I only got like 4 years with my dad, right? Even it's interesting, one of my like brother-in-laws, he knew my dad longer than he knew his dad because he lost his dad very young. So he was like, and remember we was in the room, you know, right before, you know, talking to the doctors, and he was like, yeah, your father was like a father to me. Like he told me all these stories about what my father did, and like all these things I just didn't know. So what I learned was that I try as much as possible when I have time with them. Oftentimes I have time with them in the morning. My partner goes to work, and I spend time with them, and then I drop them off at grandma's, right? So with that time, I try to maximize time, because what he's taught me is, and what that experience taught me, but what he's taught me is that he does need that like that attention. He needs that kind of, like this morning he had woke up and he was like disoriented, and he was like, he just came up to me and put his arms up like, I have to be, and like that's obviously, hopefully you see that, like, oh, that means you pick up the kid. But what sometimes it's not always evident, right?
True.
So like I have a speech impediment, and like I grew up with like, you know, delayed speech. He had delayed speech. So even more so I have to be very intentful to get his needs answered. So it's taught me to be very present, because sometimes I think you could parent passively, be on your phone, and like I'm good for, I got 2 phones right here, brother. Right. Like I got emails coming in all the time.
Right.
This is not me like flexing. Like it's just my life can get very chaotic. Yeah. And then I know when we first started living together, like I would not be as present. Now my goal always is like when we got time in the morning, like unless it's my girl, I'm not answering the phone. Like that's it. Like I'm present with him at that time. So he's taught me I gotta be present. 1, to attend to his needs, to answer them, but 2, time is precious. You don't get the time back. So it's taught me to actually disconnect sometimes, and not just with him, but sometimes I got to disconnect when I'm with my girl. Like, put your phone away. I'm like, man, you know, Revolution. They telling me we got to be in Chicago. I got to be in Chicago tomorrow morning. Like, I got to, you know, I can't.
The light is in the sky.
Right. The bat signal is up. Hey, it's go time, baby.
It's go time. I'm always ready. So, but like I've learned, man, with the people I love, even with my mother, I'm a mama's boy, and like my life is so like hectic. I only see her when I take her to her doctor's appointments, and that was like dismal for me. So like just even then though, now we stop and get lunch. Even like I don't get, you know, my job probably watch this, like I take more hours off the job. Like I'd be like, yeah, she's like, well, don't you gotta get back to work? I'm like, no, we're gonna go to lunch, because like my mother is like also one of my mentors too, which I didn't mention. But so just being present essentially with your loved ones.
Yeah, that's what's up, man. That's what's up, man. As we get towards the end, man, let's circle back to the city of Aurora, man. All right. I'm huge in believing of the success of Aurora, because I grew up here too. Yep. All right. So where do you see Aurora in the next 10 years, or hope to see?
That's a really visionary question, both literally and figuratively. I would say what I'd like to see is infrastructure in place that is independent of governance and private interest, that really serves the community, that operates at a very high level, that it can do its own food distribution, that it can tackle problems on a policy and societal, cultural level, just off its own strength. I would love to see that. They cooperate with the government, they cooperate with private interests when they need to, but they are not beholden to the government. They're not beholden to these private interests that oftentimes are not aligned with the interests of working class people, right? So that, to me, like I think, because that's very, I think, abstract, amorphous. Right. Materially, what it looks like, I think having the organizations that can present policies such as like welcoming, a legitimate welcoming city ordinance. I think it looks like democratizing public safety. I think public safety is something that's discussed a lot, and there's a lot of like, I think, debate and conversation and discourse. My goal is always to ask this: do we want safer communities? Then we have to ask ourselves, and my master's was in public policy, and I looked at my master's thesis focused on looking at I call them 4 Ds, right? Again, alliteration. I be trying to make stuff easy, bro. Went from the 3 Cs, 4 Ds. So decriminalizing drugs, decriminalizing them and getting people the help they need, because incarcerating them leads to worse outcomes. Right. It doesn't help them with the substance use, nor does it help their communities, because they're resources of their communities. You're locking up fathers and mothers, and you're destroying the family unit. Get these people the help they need, get them the resources, the jobs. The other D, I think it needs to be divestment. We need to divest from the prison industrial complex, which is the surveillance, that is policing as we know it, and that is incarceration, right? There are studies that have shown we spend more money on incarcerating people, and if we did that retroactively, meaning if we just put money into housing, giving people the housing they need, we would have less people incarcerated, but we're already spending the money. It would cost less to house people than to put them into the jail, which needs to be, you need to pay guards, you need to pay pensions, you need to pay the services that go into them. You're already paying all this money. So this idea that, well, fiscally it's irresponsible, it's already there. You're doing it one way or the other. Do it before they commit the crime. Finally, disarmament. I think there are certain situations where we have a very violent gun culture. And mind you, I'm a believer in, like, I have my 40 card. I have my, my concealed carry. So don't get it twisted. But that being said, the violent culture we have crafted. Right. But there's a good book. I'm going to tell folks to read so they know where I'm coming from. There's a good book called Negroes with Guns by Robert F. Williams. It you just put me heavily influenced Huey P. Newton. Go read that book. That's where my position is. I won't say nothing else. All right. Yeah, that's a gem. That's just give it. That being said, I think we have a violent culture. I think it starts with the militarization of the police, which has happened over decades. How do we equip them better to do their job? I don't think they're equipped to be able to do their job, and they're asked to do far too much. That being said, the nature of policing, because people say, well, Nick, there's good and bad. I don't think that's the question. I think it's the nature of policing as we know it, the institution, is the problem. They have not been set up to be pillars of public safety, right? I think they've been set up to be militarized and almost against public safety. And I'll give you an example. When they had workers like strikes, who's on the other side of the picket line? The police. When you have civil rights movements, who's on the other side of the picket line? The police. When you had the women's suffrage movement trying to get the right to vote, who's on the other side of the picket line? The police. They are actually positioned, I think, contrary to societal progression. It's not no fault of their own.
No,
I think people do it nobly.
Right.
I don't think they're positioned, equipped to do what is necessary to create safety.
Makes
and
sense.
I think it requires redefining. So finally, we had divestment, we had disarmament, we had decriminalization, and then this other one looks at decarceration, getting people out of jail who do not need to be there. Example, 70% of crimes committed in Illinois are what are called crimes of survival. These are people there due to poverty, not because they're criminal or threats to society. So 70% of the people don't need to be there. That's more money fiscally we could put into, I think, housing initiatives, food sovereignty, and building infrastructure so people can be fed. Because the reality, a lot of crime stems from poverty. Building trauma centers, building resources so people can access mental health, working class people. So the vision looks like, I think, implementing things like that. Democratizing public safety, allowing for cooperatives to exist, allowing for a different type of economy to take shape here that prioritizes people over profit. And that takes time. But
Yeah, it'll take time.
No, yeah.
What Lil Wayne say on the Carter? What was it? The Carter 4. He brought that up though. It's crazy. It's called. I think the song is Misunderstood.
Okay.
And at the end, he says, Wayne said he talked to somebody, and he said that the guy told him it would cost less for you to send somebody in the hood to college, than to send him to jail.
Yeah.
And that if you, I mean,
You're
for
right.
the
I think
viewers
it's the
out
Carter
there,
4.
I think it's the Carter 4. But go listen to that song.
Yeah,
That song.
I know what you're talking about.
I mean, Wayne was on some other stuff in the Carters.
Yeah,
but
because there's a break at the end of the song.
It's a
right?
break at the
and
end.
then I think it's President Carter. Is it President Carter?
a president. It might. I don't know.
I think it might be. I think I know what you're talking about now.
But
Yeah,
but that song, he was talking a lot of. He
Not
brought up a
President
lot of the stuff that you brought up right now. But I think it was the Carter 4.
And you know, brother, that's the thing too. Like again, being objective. If we're being objective, really
Right.
trying to better our communities, we
Yeah.
got to tackle. And I think some of it's ideological. I think people are just committed to things we've always done,
Mhm.
though statistically the evidence has shown it's not working.
Right. And
So
that-
again, I want to win, right?
Exactly. No, man. What I hope for our viewers and our listeners, man,
Yeah.
one of the things that you've been able to do is kind of maybe shine a new light on different ways to approach politics, different ways to approach your community,
Yeah.
how to get involved. And ultimately, man, that's one of the reasons why we wanted to have you on. You
Yeah.
know, like we're not a political show or anything like
Right,
that,
right.
but we do believe that, hey, if you have a different way of looking at something or approaching something, let's hear it.
Yeah.
Let's hear it. And everything that you said today, at least in my opinion, man,
Yeah.
makes a lot of sense.
Yeah.
You know, there's not a lot of anything that you said that I would necessarily disagree with. And even if there is, it might be a slight tweak. But ultimately, you can tell that genuinely your heart's in the right place.
Right.
Your mind is in the right place. You care about the city of Aurora. You
Yeah.
care about your family. And with all that being said, man, we respect you. We
Yeah, we
appreciate you for
appreciate
coming
you,
on
man.
to the podcast, man. And we'd love to have you on again
Yeah,
probably later
definitely.
on this year,
Definitely.
early next year. But is there anything else you want to say to the people?
You know, much love to everybody. Take care of your family, take care of each other, and just never fall to despair. Never fall to despair. There's always so much that can be done, and when you do it in community, it definitely will get done. So.
And where can they find you at? IG,
I'll
Twitter,
be in the
where-
streets, brother. No, I'm
Nah.
playing.
He outside.
I'm where the people at. I'm outside. I'm where the people
Yeah.
at, man.
Right.
You know, we be trying to do what we can. No, you can find me digitally on Instagram, Twitter, Facebook. And what I will also extend, if you have any questions or follow up or you want to get involved, hit me up. There's a lot of organizations. There's nonprofits. There's non-designated organizations that I think will align with anybody. And if you want to start doing work, man, hit me up. We'll plug you in.
What's your handle?
Oh, yeah, you need that.
Yeah.
Nicholas Sean SEANRT. And if you have that, you'll find me anywhere.
Find
That's
you
for
anywhere.
everything.
Cool.
Yep, Nicholas
Cool.
Sean RT.
Nicholas
Sean's my
Sean.
middle name.
Cool.
That's
Well,
what's up,
got
man.
we got some things we're working on too here with the podcast, man. So
Yeah.
we're definitely gonna get with you, man, and get
Please.
a little
Definitely.
more involved within
Definitely.
the community ourselves, because that's something I've always wanted to get into, man.
Yeah.
And I feel like the time is now.
Yeah.
You know. So
Yeah.
That's love,
And,
man.
with
Yeah.
that, hit him with the outro, cuzzo.
as always, thank you guys for tuning in to the Electives podcast. For everybody that watches and listens, we appreciate every single one of you, and we'll catch you guys on the next episode.
Peace.
Peace.
Peace.